Hello, my name is Andy Van Lukey. I'm an agricultural meteorologist here at Iowa State University. What I want to talk to you today is a concept in agroecosystems we call the carbon and nitrogen budget, or the mass balance of an agroecosystem. What we do is actually compare the existing agricultural systems that are here in Iowa, you know them very well, corn and soybeans, to new systems such as the biomass sorghum that's behind me. What we're going to talk about today is how we can actually make measurements of the wind and the things that are blowing around in the wind to add up how the carbon dioxide made its way out of the atmosphere, or that was in the atmosphere earlier this year, and is now stuck and fixed in the plants that are in the background. We'll also talk about how our techniques can not only measure the above ground biomass that you can see, but it can also give us estimates of how many roots there are below ground, and also the processes that the soil microbes are doing in terms of turning over carbon from previous years, or even earlier in this growing season. A big part of the mass balance, of course, in an agroecosystem is carbon. Carbon is the main thing that comes out of the atmosphere into plant biomass. But nitrogen also moves from the soil and also from the atmosphere in some systems into plant tissue as well. One of the things we're interested here is comparing how that nitrogen moves from fertilizer, from the atmosphere in terms of nitrogen fixation, into the soil and then out of the soil column through the tile drainage. We'll show you some unique aspects of this experiment where we've coupled above ground measurements of wind speed in a novel technique called the eddy covariance technique with biomass measurements of biomass that's here actively growing in the system, as well as the below ground matter that goes through that is in the soil profile and also goes through the soil profile in the soil water drainage. We'll show you how we monitor the drainage throughout the growing season, and we can actually tell you how much water is moving through the system, but also how much other things are going along with that water, like dissolved nitrogen that can enter the waterways of Iowa. It's a really important concept that we want to get a good measurement on when we're comparing different ecosystems here in Iowa to the ones that have been growing here for quite a while.
Hi, I'm Josh Bendorf. I'm a master's student in Dr. Van Lukey's lab here at Iowa State. A major part of my research out here at the farm is collecting above ground biomass samples. Well, these biomass samples are very useful for tracking how crops develop throughout the growing season. We can also do chemical analysis on the biomass to know how much different chemicals make up the plant biomass. One of the major ones that we really look for is carbon. Dr. Van Lukey talked about how the eddy covariance towers measure fluxes of carbon in and out of the ecosystem. One of the main storage components for carbon in the agroecosystem is in the plant biomass. So as the plants do photosynthesis, they pull carbon dioxide down from the atmosphere, and a certain fraction of that will be assimilated into their biomass. Roughly about 40 to 50% of the plant biomass will be carbon. And so by taking measurements throughout the growing season at different stages of crop development, we can get an idea of how carbon is being assimilated in the plants throughout time. And we also can get an idea, if we know how much biomass we have at the end of the growing season and what fraction of that is carbon and nitrogen as well. We can also do it with nitrogen. We know how much of those chemical constituents are being removed from the agroecosystem with harvest. For example, harvest has been going on for the past few days. So with biomass sorghum, a large portion of the above ground biomass, maybe about 90%, is being removed with harvest, so that's being taken away from the ecosystem, and maybe about 10% of the above ground biomass, and then the roots below ground are being left behind, and those will, over time, they will decompose and be assimilated into the soil organic carbon and nitrogen pools. So for in-season biomass sampling, we'll go, this plot's roughly about 8 acres. We'll choose random locations throughout the plot. We have a known area measurement that we will put on the ground, and we will cut all the plants within that area, and then we will weigh those components. We'll get fresh weight, then we'll dry them for a week, get them so we just get down to the dry components, what's not water. We'll get the measurements with that as well. And that's for knowing how we got to our final biomass, which for carbon and nitrogen balances, it's important to know how we got to that final point, not just how we got to not just the final biomass, but how we actually got there.
Hi, my name is Kate Glanville. I'm a postdoc at Iowa State working with a group of researchers and students. One of my projects is about how nitrate drainage is influenced by different cropping systems and weather. So here we have a pit with pumps and water meters, and as you can see around you, you have different crops. So there's corn, there's soybean, there's sorghum, and then there's sorghum plus a cover crop. The sorghum has recently been harvested here, and the cover crop has recently been planted as well. So we're going to see how these different systems, the sustainability of them, is influenced by nitrate drainage. So the pipes from underneath the fields come in through these PVC pipes here, and then they drain into these large black buckets. And within the buckets, there is a pump with a float on it. So when the water gets to a certain level, the float triggers the pump, and the water moves through these hoses and then up through these pipes, and then it comes to these meters. These meters are flow meters, like that are on the leading from the water mains to your houses. And these meters help us monitor how much water is moving down through the drainage systems. And then these spigots lead to these carboys here, these jugs. And from these jugs, we'll take subsamples and analyze that for different water properties, including nitrate. So we can get an assessment of total nitrate drainage from these systems. So these different fields, the drainage system with each field leads to a different bucket here and a different meter here. So this allows us to separate out what is happening in each different cropping system with replications. And then there's also 3 jugs here. So yeah, everything is kept separate. And then this pit here actually acts as a dewatering pit in case the water level, the groundwater comes up to a certain level. We don't want that to get into our separate pits for each field, so that will act to control for the extra water coming in through the floor of the pit. We're still in the process of setting up these pits to collect data. However, in the future, we're going to collect these to data loggers, and then that will log how much flow is going through the system every second. The significance of this research is comparing the sustainability of these different bioenergy systems and their impact on the environment.
Hello, my name is Rosa. I'm a postdoc working with Andy Van Lukey at Iowa State University. And today I'm going to talk about Educarian System. So what is Educarian? Let's talk about the words. Edu, it's not a name. It's not a name of man. It's coming from the swirling of the air. So it may appear that air flows horizontally across to the land, but actually it flows into the eddies. I mean, the air tumbles and goes swirling, so the gases in the air moves in that eddies. So eddy comes from that part. What about the covariance? Co means together, vary means change. So together we are measuring change. What change? The gases change at 1 second and the other second. So the difference between the 2 seconds, we are measuring the gas concentration change, at the same time wind direction and speed. These two components data come from this system to us for 10 Hertz, which means that every second we are getting 10 data. So this system provides us really huge data set. For long-term measurements, we need that huge data set because we don't want to miss anything, because we want to see the total budget of carbon dioxide for the system. So mainly I'm doing that data processing stuff coming from the system. So we are calling eddy system these 2 instruments. This instrument is called ERGA, measure the carbon dioxide and water vapor concentrations in the air. And the other one is the sonic anemometer, measures the 3-dimensional wind speed and wind direction. So these 2 instruments simultaneously working and gives us the data. That can be called as an Educarian system, but we are calling whole tower like eddy towers, because we have more sensors on the tower mounted to measure other meteorological data to combine with the EC system to better understand what is going on in the environment and how the meteorological changes affect the carbon dioxide flux. For this purpose, we have one sensor here which measures temperature, air temperature and relative humidity of the air. And we have some, you see the blue holes, we have some sensors in the ground buried, they measure the soil temperature and soil water content. And also we have one more critical instrument, just right arm, that measures the total energy components coming from incoming solar radiation and outgoing radiation. That helps us to validate our EC instrument data measurements. How? Because we are measuring a really high frequent data set. So to validate our data, we need to do balance around the energy component with these instruments. So if that works well, that means this is working well too. All data goes to that white box. We have a data loggers here. So that's the data logger, collects all the data, and we have two parts. One is for the backup data and one is for the meteorological data. So here is the yellow stuff. You can see we have a cellular modem, which is a cool stuff because we can reach that tower remotely. So the data can also upload remotely using that cellular modem, which allows us really to reach the data immediately without coming to the site. So while we were staying here, we have been getting 10,000 data, and I can reach that data when we go back to our computer and say what was the change while we were here in terms of carbon dioxide flux. Maybe we can see some peaks coming from our respiration, but I don't think so because all of us wearing masks.
So far today we've been talking about the budget of these agroecosystems and thinking about them perhaps maybe one crop at a time. One of the ideas I also wanted to talk about is how we have to think about these cropping systems really as systems. We throw the word system at the end for really an important reason, and that's because they don't exist in a vacuum, right? All crops in Iowa are grown in some form of a rotation. So while now I may be standing in the middle of a soybean field, at the same time we're also measuring a corn field over this way, a sorghum field where we were earlier today, and a miscanthus field that you'll hear about in Emily Heaton's video later on in this series. Each one of them is going on continuously at the same time, and actually the two systems interact with each other as we rotate, right? So I'm in a soybean field right now, but as it turns out, Rosha has been measuring the carbon fluxes coming from this corn stalk the whole time as it decomposes and the thousands of other corn stalks that are in the field. So we have to think about these things as they work as a system. Soon there will be some more sorghum growing in this plot, and we'll be measuring it as it takes over the system. So it's not just one crop at a time, but a cropping system that includes corn, soybean, and in our case, sorghum also being rotated into it. And we're going to compare each one of those one at a time, but also together as a system to try to understand how different rotations and how different effects of climate and weather throughout the season affect the crops differently, and the budget that we ultimately come up with when we start transitioning the landscape in Iowa agriculture to potentially incorporate some of these new bioenergy crops.